Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about something that I should have mentioned or made a video about a long time ago. It's going to be getting onto the floor and getting back up off the floor, to and from the wheelchair. So this of course has a lot of assumptions, right? Like moving your arms, like having arm movement, having basic strength, being somewhat fit. I mean, the thing is, you can still do it, and I'm going to show you how to do it if some of those things are lacking. And if you need help from an extra person, I can show you how you would get that. But for those who are a little bit more independent or are looking to gain some more independence, this is how to get from the wheelchair to the ground and then the ground back to the wheelchair. So I just wanted to say, like, of course, I'm making a lot of assumptions for what people can and can't do, body shapes, body types, strength, etc. But the basics are here, and then working with that and making it your own, that's how you do it. That's your way. Everyone has the way that works for them. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. The first thing is noticing the ground type, right? So this is assuming that you haven't fallen. If you've fallen, which, I've done that before too, like outside, and you fall somewhere, and if you're in the middle of nowhere or something like that, it might be best to get some help if someone's around. Otherwise, you can kind of use these things, but what we're talking about here is deliberately getting out of the wheelchair onto the floor. Maybe if you have kids, you're playing with them on the ground, Legos or something, just to get on the ground, lay down or whatever, anything like that. So with that though, first thing that you want to know is the ground type. You don't want to do this on hard floor. You want to do this on carpet, have a pillow, have a thick blanket, even a thick blanket, maybe 2 or 3 year folded, because you do want a good bit of cushioning. So I'm going to do it without the table, but the table's here for a reason. First thing is having brakes on the wheelchair. You don't necessarily need them, but it helps so much that I think anyone without brakes on their wheelchair, you're limiting yourself, because it's a really, really important thing. So brakes on, right? Next step is feet off. And at this point I'm scooched up, right? And so if you struggle with core control, you might need to have your hand somewhere like here, just to help control your upper body. And so if you don't see me doing that, it's because I don't necessarily need that. But note that whatever that is, you can support yourself in which way. Feet are off, and they're on the ground. And the goal is to get right up to the edge of the wheelchair and kick your feet out as far as possible, because you're coming down into them, and you'll see this. And so you want them out of the way. And you could maybe have them off to the side, but I think in front, that's what I do, works for me. And now what we're doing here, this depends a lot on where these kind of bars here are, but they should be wide enough, at least for legs to fit here. And so I'm just grabbing these, and I'm going to kind of pull myself down. Or, like how you can see this leg, if your knee is locked out, your leg will just kind of kick out instead of bending like this leg did. Either way, I think is perfectly fine. And you also do want to note that if you put too much weight forward, the wheelchair, as you can kind of see, it tips forward. So while I'm doing this, I'm also kind of leaning back just so that there's not too much weight up on these front wheels, which will then cause the wheelchair to tip, and in that case you might kind of fall. Hopefully not too bad. So you can see I'm kind of leaning back here, and I'm bringing, in my back right now is pretty much touching the front of the front of the wheelchair. And so I'm coming down, and I'm going to basically kind of sit right here on this, what do you call it, the foot pad thing. What is it called?
It's a foot plate.
So at this point you can see one leg is out, one leg is in. That's pretty good. And my arms are still here, so some flexibility might be required. But at this point, so the cushion will also flip up. So see, now I'm back on. Don't worry about what I just did, but what I'm showing you again is just how I'm getting down, and I pull my arms down, but you don't have to hold it that long. Pretty much as soon as I'm coming down, as soon as my arm will reach the ground, my arm is on the ground, and you can see the wheelchair now is tipping. is tipping forward. So this is something you do want to be careful with. And so I'm just pulling myself up and off of this foot plate. And here I am on the ground. Alright, so perfectly fine if I want to meditate, build a Lego set, pull my sock up, anything like that. And now we're on the ground, and moving on the ground is you're pretty much just lifting up and getting your butt off the ground and scooching around. And so now we're just getting it right back up. This is how we're getting up without anything around. So there are a few ways to do this, and I think there's other YouTube videos and such, and if you have a physical therapist, they might have a whole other way to do it. This is what I find that works for me the best. I've tried some other ways, and they work, but this one seems to be mostly easy. It does require some flexibility and some tricep to do kind of a dip. The first thing is getting your feet and your body in position. So I'm getting right up against this foot plate. It's touching my body right now, up against the back of my hip. And then what I'm doing is I'm bringing my legs as close as possible just in. So I'm like a little hush puppy. And reaching back, so you can kind of see that I'm at a bit of an angle here. And that's because these two bars here are actually very, very close together for me and probably for anyone. So I'm not going to be directly reaching back to both of these. I'm going to first have my hand on the ground here. It's okay if your leg falls down. And just kind of pop myself back up onto the foot plate. Now at this point, the wheelchair will kind of tip forward. So another thing that we can kind of do here is just kick the legs out a little bit. That way they're giving us a little bit of pushback to push back on the wheelchair from tipping. So reaching back, sitting up, and see, you can kind of see now how the wheelchair isn't falling forward as much because there's not that much weight right here. It's a little bit dispersed with my legs out. And then from here, this part, you can also grab right here, if you need to grab here and just support yourself. And this foot plate is narrow, so if you have wider hips or you have a more narrow foot plate, this might be an issue and you might be kind of pinched in here. And in that case, it would probably be best to use something like a table because you really are going to need to get this close. And I'm reaching back and I'm grabbing these two things, and then you push yourself up. And this is where a lot of the strength comes in. And that's why it's very, very important to try to be as fit and strong as possible while you're in the wheelchair. Within whatever limitations you have, you can go to almost any gym or anything, find some type of personal trainer who is willing to help you, or a physical therapy rehab place. And at this point, we're just pulling ourselves up and coming back. One thing to note is my arms are a bit short, so I'm not lifting myself up that high. If you have longer arms, you will be able to push your body up higher, which means your butt with this pad, my butt will kind of scrape it a little bit, not scrape, but go against it a little bit below it and kind of push it back and roll it back. So I really got to try to push up as high as I can. And as you can see, this is something where I'm leaning forward. So it's all about the hip and head, where those are. So I got myself up, lifting my legs up back up onto the foot plate, and then I'll just kind of lift up here, sit back down, and that'll kind of help the cushion roll back out as it is. Okay. So there's that. It's a little bit more advanced, and there's other ways to do it. So now what I'll show you is using the table. Now, you can also use it to help you get down as well. So coming up to it, you want to be somewhat close to it, because what we're thinking about here is if my body's going to be on the ground, how far can I reach? Right? So if my body's down there, and let's say this table were way up here, well, my arm's up here now, but if I'm way down there, I can't reach it. So whenever we're doing any transfers at all, we're thinking about where is my arm going to be, for where are both my arms going to be. So if I'm transferring, let's say I'm transferring from this chair to the table, Now I'm thinking my arm's here and my arm's here. This arm is not being stretched at all, but if I wanted to transfer up onto the table, now this arm is fully stretched out. So keeping that in mind, just that type of the body mechanics, I don't know what you call it, just length of where your arms are. Feet off the foot plate. Feet are off the foot plate. And getting up to the edge, just the same. And now I'm going to put my weight here between the table and the wheelchair. And then I'm just going to kind of bring myself forward. And you can even kind of go into the squat position and rest. And it's actually very good for stretching. You can come up here and you can rest. And then I'll just kind of pull myself down onto the ground. And it's a lot nicer to do that. I recommend doing that. If you can, do it. I do it all the time. I prefer this. It's easier and everything. So now we're back here, and getting up is almost the exact same thing, just in reverse. So you have your feet somewhere close nearby, right, as long as they're not detached. And if they are, then I guess it's probably like a, what do you call it, amputated leg, not a real leg. Sorry, can't think of words. But the point is, your feet anywhere, pretty much anywhere, is going to be fine. And we're going like this. If you can reach further back, closer to the chair, that's good, but that requires a lot of stretching. So somewhere kind of closer. And what you can even do is, let's take the brakes off the chair real quick here and twist it here. And so you'll kind of get it almost facing each other, a very wide angle between the wheelchair and the table itself there. And put the brakes back on. Getting kind of close here. And so then what we're imagining is this is just like a transfer, as if I were sitting on the table or something and I want to transfer onto the chair, but I'm also below it. So arm up here, this can be a bit of a stretch depending on the height. Lift yourself up. And so like, yes, I made that look easy, it's not that easy. And then you're pulling yourself back, pulling your hips back, actually, down onto the chair. And I recommend, highly recommend, playing around with where the chair is versus where something like this table is. And you can use something like a chair or anything, but as long as it's a certain height. Because again, we're thinking about the arm stretch. So if I'm down on the ground, you can see, like, pretend my arm isn't touching this table. But if my arm were here, right? So if I were just like this, you could kind of transfer down to the ground, and it's really, really difficult, unless you have long arms, really difficult to transfer back up to the chair if you're pushing off the ground. Now it's possible, but very hard, because as you can see, my arm here is fully stretched out, so I have no more push to push my body up. So now when I'm trying to push myself up, like I can kind of do it, but it doesn't really work, so I'm using this table. So that's an important thing to think of, is what you're using to help lift yourself off the ground onto the chair has to be above a certain height to give you that leverage and give you that push. Now, if I were transferring off the ground onto the chair, I could maybe use something this high, because if my arm is pushing off something here, then I can certainly push my body up. And of course, that also depends on your core strength, whether or not you have any, stuff like that. So there's that. The next thing is getting help from somebody. So if you're out in public or you just don't have anything like this, getting help from somebody to lift you up, it's very similar to the concept of pushing off a table or something, but instead of the table, it's someone actually pulling you up. I always recommend, for every single transfer, I highly recommend having your hand, at least one hand, on the wheelchair. If you don't have brakes, this keeps it from moving. And if you do have brakes still, this means that when you're doing the transfer, no matter what happens, you can kind of grab the chair, and if the brakes aren't too strong, you can pull it around. And another thing to note is that if you put weight on the front wheels here, you can lift the chair up, and even if the brakes are on how they are now, you can move it around a bit. So what we're looking at here is, I'll be on the ground, right? And now let's say table's not there and I need help getting up. One of the things that helps with having at least one hand on the chair is you kind of know where it is and you can guide your body to it. So when you're getting help from someone else, it'll usually be just one-sided. They could scoop you up from beneath, like from behind and beneath your armpits. So they can scoop you up from there, and then as long as you kind of have some strength to not just let your arms flop, then you can get lifted up onto the wheelchair. But that's assuming the wheelchair doesn't move at all. You want to usually have one hand on the wheelchair and then one person kind of acting as the table. So come here, and this is my younger brother. And see, look at just real quick how I'm moving this wheelchair around by pushing on the foot plate. Just kind of give me a lift, hand and just like arm-wise, and then just like that. So, and that's a lot nicer because it's, the person can move around with your body versus where the table, you're kind of, it doesn't really move, and hopefully it doesn't move, and your arm is kind of where it's grabbing. So that's ground to floor, floor to ground transfers. It's a long video, but I think everything is pretty important there, and I talked a lot about a lot of different things, and so we're done now.